and we will have free lunch at 11:30, and a speaker from 12 to 1 at 8:102. Free lunch. Debbie. Free lunch. On your bed.
Hi everybody. Today our speaker will be Richard Maddy. Mr. Maddy holds a Bachelor of Arts degree in Classical and Hellenistic Greek from SMU in Dallas. Mr. Maddy has also worked in the pharmaceutical industry for 30 years. He also holds a master's degree in medical anthropology. The title of his presentation will be Who Was Jack the Ripper? You guys would all welcome me and applaud me and welcome me, Mr. Maddy.
How many of you came because you thought you were going to find out who Jack the Ripper was? Why are you going to be disappointed? No, there are so many suspects, and we're just going to go into a few of them today. But I think you'll find the ones that we look at are going to be interesting. Jack the Ripper, what do you think of when you think of Jack the Ripper? You kind of think of a serial killer, right? So typical serial killer. But thanks. What is a serial killer? We kind of need to define that first of all. When you're talking about serial killers, it's a person who has murdered 3 or more times over a period of time that's greater than 1 month. That's typically how we classify. There is a cooling off period between the murders, usually, which is what we will see happen to Jack the Ripper. And the killing is based on some sort of psychological gratification. So there's a payoff for the serial killer. Some psychological gratification could be my mother dressed me funny. That's the reason why I'm still okay. You don't recognize this. This is Frank Zappa, the Mothers of Invention. But sometimes it doesn't work out. My mother really did dress me funny, and I'm not a serial killer so far. Their pants don't fit anymore, by the way. But sometimes there are different reasons. Numerous factors come into play that can create the proper psychological environment for the individual to become a serial killer and commit the first in a series of murders. We're going to find out that in the East End of London, in the late summer and early fall of 1888, all 3 of these factors came into play. One of the great ministers of the time, Charles Spurgeon, actually addressed this issue from his pulpit in September of 1888, right after some of the first murders. He said, "We hear startling news of abounding sin in this great city. O God, put an end to this, and grant that we may hear no more of such deeds. Let thy gospel permeate the city. Let not monsters in human shape escape thee." So it was noticed throughout the city. This was a pretty big church that he was speaking to. He spoke to about 10,000 people. There were 11 separate murders that went from the 3rd of April, 1888, to the 13th of February, 1891. And they were included in a police docket that was collectively titled Whitechapel Murders. It was based on the part of London that the murders were committed. There are a lot of different opinions as to who committed these murders and whether or not they should be linked together. Now, we do know that 5 of the 11, we think, can be attributed to a serial killer who came to be known as Jack the Ripper. You get the name Jack the Ripper really only from one of the first letters, and we think that this particular letter was a hoax. But it was a name that was put into the letter by whoever wrote it. It originated in this particular one claiming to be the murderer. based on handwriting analysis and based on conversations that were recorded between individuals, we think the person who wrote this letter was probably a journalist, probably wanting to get publicity for the murders and sell more newspapers. Nonetheless, the name stuck. Previously, it had been called the Whitechapel Murderer. Leather Apron was the name for it because he had been connected to a person who had been a shoemaker and wore a leather apron. But Jack the Ripper had kind of a neat ring to it, and that name was the one that we always remember. The attacks that are attributed to Jack the Ripper always involve female prostitutes. They're always from the slums, and they always had their throat cut prior to the abdominal mutilations. There were, in most cases, of the 5 that we really believe were committed by Jack the Ripper, in 4 of the 5 there were abdominal mutilations, and in the one that didn't have abdominal mutilations, we believe that Jack the Ripper was interrupted right in the middle of doing it. There was the removal of internal organs from at least 3 of the victims, and this gave investigators a reason to believe that the perpetrator had some sort of knowledge of anatomy. In fact, initially, some of the information leaked out that it might possibly have been a doctor. Scotland Yard, at the time, received an awful lot of letters from people saying that they were the murderer, simply because they wanted to get the publicity. Truth be known, to this day, the Metropolitan Police Department at Scotland Yard still receives letters saying that they're Jack the Ripper. There is one letter that we think is genuine, or at least close to genuine, and it's a letter that was entitled From Hell. It was addressed to Mr. George Lusk, who was the head of the Whitechapel Vigilance Committee, a group of vigilantes that were individuals who had sort of deputized themselves to go around and protect people. It was sent to him with half of a human kidney that had been preserved in gin. And supposedly, according to the letter, the individual who sent this said that he ate the other half. He tried it and ate it. Now, the 5 murders that we believe are directly attributable to the person we call Jack the Ripper are a group that we call the Canonical 5. We call them the Canonical 5 simply because the word canon means a rule or a measure that you measure something by. And these are the ones that we feel measure up to the modus operandi of Jack the Ripper. So we have the Canonical 5 Whitechapel murders. And I'll go through them rather quickly and not belabor the point. The first was Mary Ann Nichols, who was murdered on August 31st, 1888. She was murdered in an alleyway. Most of the prostitutes at that time would grab the individual that they were going to do business with, pull them into a dark alleyway or pull them into a courtyard and ply their trade there. This whole area of Whitechapel was very, very dark at the time. You could literally hide 3 feet away from someone. So it was the perfect environment for prostitution to take place, but it was also a perfect environment for murder to take place. She was murdered on August 31st, 1888, the very first murder. A week later, September 8th, 1888, Annie Chapman, another prostitute that had fallen on hard times and had bragged before she went out that she was going to make enough money to buy a new hat. On September 30th, Jack did 2 murders. Now, the first one, Elizabeth Stride, right here, she was relatively unscathed by Jack the Ripper standards because we believe that someone came along when he was right in the middle of killing her and interrupted what doesn't really do it justice. She nearly had her head removed. The cut was so deep that it went into her cervical vertebrae and nearly cut them in half. So if we were looking at it on this skeleton right here, the knife penetrated the cervical vertebrae almost all the way through. It was a very deep, slashing cut, and you can see there's a little bit of a cut on the mouth here. Catherine Eddowes was not quite so lucky. He literally field dressed her almost like he would an animal. He cut her a big gashing hole in her throat from left to right. So we're pretty sure he was right-handed. He was reaching around and pulling the knife in this direction. And then he performed an incision that's almost like the incision that a pathologist will do at an autopsy. When he was through making this incision, and in the first two as well, he did something very similar. He took her internal organs, her intestines primarily, and threw them over her shoulders. That's the way that she was left to be found. This is a very sick and disturbed individual. The final one was probably the most grotesque of them all. This was Mary Jane Kelly. It was on November 9th, 1888. She was literally hacked to pieces. The bed that she was lying in was one mass of congealed blood. And they literally had to take her off of this bed in several pieces because she was falling apart. She had been stabbed so violently. Well, who did it? If you look at the literature, there are as many as 37 individuals that have been suggested as potential suspects. Some of them are ridiculous. Some of them, well, an example, one was Oscar Wilde. You know, Oscar Wilde wouldn't hurt twice. There's a book called Famous Last Words. Oscar Wilde's last words were either this wallpaper goes or I do. So he was not the type of person that was necessarily going to hurt somebody. But the ones that kind of get your attention are that some are funny. They thought it was Lewis Carroll, the author of Alice in Wonderland. I don't think so. He was actually a mathematician by trade. Sir William Gull was Queen Victoria's personal physician. Now, this one got a lot of traction because of some books that were written back in the 1970s. Some of the early reports about Jack the Ripper said that he knew a lot about medicine because of the way that the bodies were carved up and the way that the kidney was taken out on that one letter that was addressed from hell. Because in order to take the kidney out, you have to have a fairly decent knowledge of human anatomy to be able to get to it. It's not exactly where you would think it would be, particularly if you're getting it from the front and not from the side. And that's where they were taken. So Sir William Gull, I think, was used in a way to confuse a lot of people as to who legitimate suspects would be. And of course, one that everybody, I think, has heard about, Prince Albert Victor, who was the Duke of Clarence, who was Queen Victoria's grandson. If you've seen the movie Murdered by Decree, that's written about this, or filmed about this, or the Johnny Depp movie From Hell, the idea that you put Sir William Gull together with Prince Albert Victor and you have the reason for killing all these prostitutes is kind of the tack that they were taking to explain that. Because Prince Albert Victor had been consorting with prostitutes, and it was Sir William Gull, the physician, it was his job to clean things up and take care of all the suspects. So he went around killing everybody. Totally bogus. Another suspect is Herman Webster Mudgett, also known as H.H. Holmes. He really was a serial killer. And he was a serial killer in Chicago at the World's Fair in 1893. We know he killed at least 27 people. And we think he may have killed as many as 200. But we're not sure. We'll never know. He was executed.
But there are three that you hear more about than you do some of the others. And we'll look at those in depth and see if we can figure out who did this. First one, of course, is Albert. I'm going to kind of clear that up for you. Albert Clarence. An artist named Walter Richard Sickert, and a sailor named Carl Figgenbaum. After the murder of Annie Chapman, it was late in Ms. Long, who was interviewed. She said she recorded seeing Annie Chapman in the company of a man who was of dark or ruddy complexion, and he looked like he was maybe not English, maybe foreign. Said he had what she called a shabby genteel appearance, whatever that means. And he was wearing a deerstalker hat and had a dark overcoat. She thought maybe this could be Jack the Ripper. Well, for those of you who don't know what a deerstalker cap is, it's a type of cap that Sherlock Holmes wears. At least we picture Sherlock Holmes in. And it was worn by a lot of people in rural areas. People would wear them to go out hunting. That's why they call it a deerstalker cap. They're out hunting deer. So it became kind of stereotypical for a detective to wear once Sherlock Holmes was spotted in them. But somebody else wore deerstalker caps too. Albert Victor wore them, and it was this guy, Philippe Julian, who was writing a biography of Albert Victor's father, King Edward VII, when he first suggested that Albert Victor might have been Jack the Ripper, and this was based on a rumor that he heard from a person who heard it from another person. Here's a picture of Albert Victor in his deerstalker cap. He was only 24 when the murders were committed, but if you look at him, he's got the mustache. He looks a little bit older. He's got kind of a ruddy complexion, and he just sort of fit the bill. So when this information comes along, and bear in mind the information on him didn't come along until about 1960 or 62. So when it comes along, you think, well, that'd be pretty cool. I think somebody in the royal family that did that. Well, Julian did not give the details or the dates of his sources. And they believe that the rumor came from a retired physician named Thomas Stoll. Now, in 1960, he told the rumor to a writer who told it to another writer who told it to Julian. So it goes in this book. Now, this is so far off the track, it's not even funny, but you have people that believe it. And you have people that believe it still today as being viable. It was brought to public attention really in 1970 when Stoll himself, a retired physician, published an article in the Neurologist, and he said that it was his suspicion, always had been, that Prince Albert Victor was Jack the Ripper. He had been driven mad, he said, by syphilis. Prince Albert Victor had gone to the Bahamas. That was the protectorate of the British Empire at the time. So went down there on vacation and somehow had contracted syphilis during his time down there. How he got it, I don't know. Toilet soup, probably. But everybody dismisses this suggestion. I mean, it's really kind of ridiculous. Stoll later recanted, and his son said that he had burned his father's papers where we could have found out definitively if anything happened. So there's really no evidence for or against it, but it just sounds so ridiculous, it's not even funny. So rather than, now another turn that this takes is rather than implicate him directly as Jack the Ripper, they take another tack. They say that he secretly married a Catholic shop assistant that Queen Victoria did not approve of, and that they had a baby. So she appealed to the British Prime Minister at the time, Lord Salisbury, and all of his Freemason friends. Well, guess who some of his Freemason friends are? One is Sir William Gull, the Queen's physician. And they send them out to murder anybody that supposedly knew about the Prince's Child. Well, they're saying that the people that were murdered were all in on this conspiracy to cover up the knowledge of the Prince's Child. A little bit ridiculous, but a lot of these facts contradict each other. The originator of the myth here was a fellow named Joseph Gorman. He later retracted the story. He said it was a hoax, but by the time he said it was a hoax, it was going so well, and they had already made the movie Murder by Decree, which sort of stoked the flames that, why stop? And you have different variations of it. That William Gull was working with the artist Walter Sickert. That William Gull was working with the poet James Kenneth Stevenson, who had been a tutor for Prince Albert Victor. So all of these people were being pulled in because there was such a desire to get the royal family involved in it. Because if you can get the royal family involved in it, the common people can say, hey, they're just like me. Or even, maybe they're worse than me. Because at least I don't go out and murder people. Well, Albert Victor died of pneumonia after being a victim of the great pandemic of influenza, 1892 and 1893. And we know that for a fact. We have his medical records. He was checked out at Oxford University. That's where all the royal family went. The Oxford physicians worked on them. They had extensive medical records. Even if you subscribe to the idea that he might have contracted syphilis and his doctors were hiding that, they still have clear, incontrovertible evidence that he died of lung infection that was secondary to influenza. And it was pneumonia that finally took him. Well, Walter Sickert, that has an appropriate last name, he was one weird guy. Now, he was born in Germany. He was born in Munich. He was what art historians would refer to as an impressionist or post-impressionist painter. He was a member of a painting group called the Camden Town Group. These were English impressionist artists who painted for a short period of time in the area of Camden Town between 1911 and 1913. They would meet at Sickert's studio in Camden Town section of London. He was very eccentric. He liked to be around what he considered to be ordinary people. He liked to look at urban scenes. He liked to walk through slums. He really loved to go around Whitechapel because he thought everything that was going on in Whitechapel was real life. That's where real life is conducted. It's not uppity or anything like that. And he, more than anybody else, appreciated, I think, the lowly people that he would see in Whitechapel. And you see this played out in a lot of his paintings. However, he did do some paintings of the wealthy. He did a painting of Sir Winston Churchill that was commissioned in 1927. Now, he did it in an impressionistic manner, and interestingly enough, when Churchill saw it, Churchill did not like it. Churchill himself was somewhat of an artist, or at least he fancied himself an artist, and when he looked at it, he made his typical statement when someone painted a picture of him that he didn't like. He said the portrait is a fine example of modern art. So he didn't like it at all, but nonetheless, Sickert painted it, and that painting, the last time it sold, went for about £6 million. Sickert's father was a German artist also. Walter was born in Munich. They moved with the family to England, and he'd been asked to display his art at the Great Exhibition. Anybody know what the Great Exhibition was? Well, it wasn't this. The Great Exhibition was sort of like a World's Fair in England. If you've heard of the Crystal Palace in London, which exists no more because it burned down, the Crystal Palace was built for the Great Exhibition. So it was really a world exhibition of everything new and everything wonderful. And it was a very popular 19th century venue. They asked a lot of artists to come over and provide art for it, and Oswald Sickert, Walter Sickert's father, was one of the artists they asked to come along. Since he's living in England now, brought over at a young age, his parents sent him to University College, which was a private school, between 1870 and 1871. Then he transfers to King's College in Wimbledon. He studied mostly art there. He studied the things that you have to study, or that you had to study at the time: Greek, Latin, grammar, a little bit of mathematics, but everything that you needed to be a refined citizen of the British, or subject of the British Empire. And then his father arranged for him to study art with this guy right here. This is James McNeill Whistler. James McNeill Whistler was a very famous American artist who lived in England at the time. And you probably are familiar with a painting that he did of his own mother, which is not called Whistler's mother. It's called Raining Grand Black. But that's who it was. He also went to Paris to study with Edgar Degas. Degas, a very famous Impressionist painter who painted scenes of ballet. He painted horse races, and painted one right here called The Absinthe, absinthe abusers. It was a drug at the time that they used. Well, when we're looking at Sickert from a psychological point, this gets interesting. He was born with a congenital defect of the penis that had required several surgeries by the time he was 5 years of age. In fact, when he was asked about moving to England from Germany, he sort of cryptically gave away something. He said, "I came to England to be circumcised." Weird thing to say. But it obviously played a part in his thinking. Trish Cornwell, who has written a lot of murder mysteries and books like that, got very interested in it. She wondered if the Jack the Ripper murders could be analyzed from a modern forensic perspective. And she went after Sickert to see maybe if he was the guy, because he looked to her at the time like the one that was the most viable suspect. So, and she wrote a book about it called Portrait of the Killer, Jack the Ripper Case Closed. And she said in here, just speculates, that this defect in his genitourinary system could have rendered him impotent. Excuse me. That's probably why he dressed so well, because if you're going to be impotent, you need to look impotent. So, but it's unlikely that he would have been able to have sexual intercourse based on the defect that he had. She goes so far as to say that his problem could have been a form of what is referred to in the psychological literature as male pseudo-hermaphroditism. So he was sort of ambiguous as to his gender. She argues that the corrective surgeries would probably have left him horribly mutilated, and more than likely, she says, given him somewhat of a misogynistic attitude, a woman hater. She psychoanalyzes him, claiming that his physical defects had a profound psychological effect on his view of women, caused him to hate beautiful and desirable women, gravitate towards less attractive females. In fact, when he was interviewed about models that he would paint. He'd say the uglier the better. I want to paint the ugliest woman I can see. So you can see he loved to use ugly models. Sorry. But his fascination with this type of culture was reflected in some paintings that he did in the Cumberland Market area of London, and then in Camden Town in 1905. And it's Camden Town that would give him his reputation, because he did a series of paintings called the Camden Town Murders. And then right after that, he did a painting for which we have no explanation. It's a painting called Jack the Ripper's Bedroom. And we don't know how he knew what he knew about Jack the Ripper's bedroom. Camden Town Murders happened in 1907. There was a woman who was a prostitute who was caught cheating on her partner. That must have been a shock to him. And he murdered her at their home. In fact, after they had had sex, he slit her throat and then left her there in the morning. It became a national sensation, and Sickert became very, very curious about this. And he put it in his painting, and this is his first painting of the Camden Town Murder. Now, most of his paintings along these lines include, and all the psychologists here can tell me if this means anything, but it always includes a male, usually fully dressed, and a nude female who's had her throat slit. When the Whitechapel murders took place, Sickert got really, really interested. He started writing letters to the newspapers. He started telling people, I think I stayed in the same room that Jack the Ripper stayed. And he believed that Jack the Ripper was someone that he had passed on the street, that he would know him, that he would recognize. And then he paints this picture, Jack the Ripper's bedroom. It's kind of hard to see, but here's a figure hunched over in front of a window. Today you'll see the painting in the Manchester Art Gallery in Manchester, England. For a long time it was missing. Sickert had given it to a 20-year-old art student of his when he was in his 60s. And it had disappeared for years and years and years. But we've always wondered, and Patricia Cornwell wondered, why would he paint a painting like that entitled Jack the Ripper's Bedroom if he didn't know something about it? Why would he be so fascinated with Jack the Ripper if he wasn't in some way connected? And as I said, his paintings always depict clothed male murderers and nude female victims as part of the Camden Town group. He died in Bath, England, 1942 at the age of 81. He'd been married 3 times, so apparently his physical deformity didn't slow him down too much. Well, it first came out that he was a suspect in a book by Jean Overton Miller called Sickert and the Ripper Crimes. And she claimed that Sickert was the actual killer. This did not go over well in England because at this time Sickert was a national icon in terms of art. The British are incredibly competitive with the French when it comes to everything, and particularly when it comes to art. The French always claimed, and I think rightly so, that they had the greatest impressionist artists in the world. People like Degas, people like Monet. And they also claimed Van Gogh, even though he wasn't. But the British say, oh no, Sickert was better. So this raised a big stink. 2002, Patricia Cornwell wrote this book, Portrait of a Killer, Jack the Ripper Pays Clothes. She believes that Sickert was directly responsible for the murders, and she has, I think, somewhat of a reason to believe. She bought 31 of his paintings. Shows you how much writers make. This cost her, I think I heard, about 7.5 million pounds to buy them. So I think in today's money, you multiply that by, $2.42, I think you have the American dollars. She said she was able to sign scientifically proved that DNA on a letter attributed to the Ripper and one written by Sickert belonged to only 1% of the population of London. London, at the time of Jack the Ripper, had about 4.5 million people. So 1% of that population, pretty good chunk of humanity right there, that doesn't necessarily prove anything. So let's look at her thesis. Jack the Ripper sent taunting letters to the police and media during the murder spree. We know that Sickert was a letter writer. He loved to write letters to the newspaper. They're forensic scientists, and Cornwell came fully loaded with a group of forensic scientists with her. Checked letters written by Sickert. They matched the DNA, the mitochondrial DNA that would be traced through the mother's line, to try and find a similarity between letters that we know that he wrote and letters that the Metropolitan Police would have, and maybe be able to get some material from the envelope where someone might have whipped the envelope. But still not able to find it. Most of the Ripper letters are considered to be hoaxes. Anybody have an idea of how many Jack the Ripper letters there are? Over 600. So if they all came from Jack the Ripper, Jack the Ripper wouldn't have been a murderer, he was a letter writer. Metropolitan Police and the City Police received hundreds of letters in 1888. And the authors claimed to be Whitechapel murderer, or they were offering advice on how to catch the killer, or I know who did it, or a number of other things that were related to it. They're all still in the file of the National Archives. Scotland Yard received letters like this up until the mid-1960s. Sometimes they received one or two today. They just sort of slip through. And again, I keep telling my students there are 5% of the population that believes the Elvis is still alive. So, what can I tell you? So a lot of these letters were mailed from London, but a lot of them were mailed from outside the UK. They came from France. They came from the United States. They came from South Africa. They came from Australia. So Jack the Ripper is a world traveler. Well, obviously, one person could not have written all or even most of the letters. The handwriting, the grammar, the spelling, and the tone of the communications vary from one letter to another. Some of the letters are written in a very shaky type of handwriting, kind of a scrawl. Some of them almost look like calligraphy, very, very beautiful penmanship. Some of them have spelling errors, and they appear to be the work of someone who was just barely living. Others are thoughtfully written. In some cases, they contain poems, poetry along with it. So, what does this tell you? If you're going to compose a letter, go to the right place. Now, a lot of modern works have addressed these. If you look at the letters, there are 2 complete volumes where you can look at all 600 if you want to. It had become sort of a national pastime. And we have some famous ones. The handout that you have has 2 of them. One is the what we call the Dear Boss letter, or the Openshaw letter, that was named after the Inspector Openshaw, who it was addressed to initially. And then the second one on there is the From Hell. That's the one that we think could possibly be real. Now, the early letters were reproduced on broadsheets in the newspaper and actually printed these things in the newspaper. So this further adds fuel to the fire. Everybody's wandering around wondering when Jack the Ripper is going to strike next. Mothers used to use it as a means to get their children to go to sleep. You better go to bed or Jack the Ripper is going to get you. all this did really was start the snowball rolling. Because when individuals read this in the newspaper, there are a number of them out there that think, wow, if this got publicity, I want to get some publicity, so we'll just keep on going, keep on going. And a lot of the amateurs tried to copy some of the phrases that were in the initial letters, like Dear Boss, like I love my work, and things like that, and sign it Jack the Ripper. Well, we know of at least two people who were arrested and charged for hoaxing Ripper letters. Both of them were women. First was a woman from Bradford named Maria Coroner. The second one was a lady from east of London. And there were a lot of others. There has even been speculation by one writer that there was a Jill the Ripper. But the way that Jill killed her husband was very uncharacteristic of how Jack the Ripper lived. So we don't think that was viable. This is the From Hell letter. This is the one that was not signed Jack the Ripper, and that's one of the reasons why they think that this might be genuine. It was sent to George Lusk about 3 weeks after the murder of Catherine Eddowes, and it had with it a small piece of human kidney that was preserved in gin. Now here's the text of it, with spelling errors and everything. He hadn't been in the right place either. I send you half the kidney I took from one woman, preserved it for you. T'other piece I fried and ate, it was very nice. I may send you the bloody knife that took it out, if you only wait a while longer. Signed, catch me when you can, Mr. Lusk. Kind of a creepy letter. The original letter was stolen from Scotland Yard in the 1950s. They had made about 8 xerographic copies, of which this is one. Author of the letter claimed to have known about Eddowes' kidney being taken out, claimed he ate half of it. We don't know a lot about this. Lynn Baxter, who was the coroner at the time, analyzed the kidney and also analyzed the body. And it was his opinion that that kidney couldn't have been taken from that body because of the way that the vessels that joined the kidney into the body had been mutilated. You would see corresponding marks in the body that were related to the kidney. What they think it might have been was, in those days, medical students had access to cadavers because they were doing gross anatomy. There was a London hospital right there in Flagstaff. They believe this may have been a hoax of one of the medical students. And this is basically what this just says, could have been pranked by a medical student. The Openshaw letter, according to Cornwell, provided mitochondrial DNA and watermarks from that letter that were found in reams of paper in Walter Sickert's effects when he died. He had reams of writing paper that he'd gotten from a London stationer. Now these individual sheets of paper have a distinct watermark. When you hold it up to the light, you can see, and it tells you who manufactured it. Well, this letter matches up with a particular lie that Walter Sickert had. This letter, if you look at some of the handwriting in it, is fairly good. It also looks like it might have been written with a particular type of pen that artists use to sketch in their painting before they paint it. So we think, at the very least, Sickert may have been one of the hoaxers that was writing letters. But Ms. Cornwell, in spite of all of her DNA evidence, has not been able to connect Sickert to the Ripper murders. There's no original DNA left. Nothing that we can do. So we'll never know. We think at least he might have had a part in hoaxing this whole situation. Now, another interesting person that we'll wind up with is Carl Feigenbaum. He made this statement to his lawyer right before he was executed. He said, "I have for years suffered from a singular disease which induces an all-absorbing passion. This passion manifests itself in a desire to kill and mutilate every woman who falls in my way. I'm unable to control myself." And I think we both felt that way. But this is an artist's conception of Carl Feigenbaum, a police artist. You don't have any photographs of him. He was a German sailor who had worked for the White Star Line. This was the line of ships that the Titanic would come from. He was known to have been in port at London during some of the Ripper murders. We don't know for sure if he was there for all of them because he changed his name all the time. Sometimes he used the last name Zahm, Z-A-H-M. Sometimes he used the last name Zahn. And then sometimes he used the last name Stroban, which was his sister's last name. So we don't know. He was never listed among the suspects at the Metropolitan Police, but if he was a sailor and he came and went, he'd be kind of hard to catch. Well, he traveled all over. He traveled to South America. He traveled back and forth to Europe. And then he traveled to New York City. And he rented a room from a Hungarian immigrant named Juliana Hoffman. And after midnight on the 1st of September 1892, he attacked Miss Hoffman, probably to rob her, with a long-bladed knife. And it killed her. And that long-bladed knife was a clue because the coroner in the Jack the Ripper murders said that the knife that was used was a very long-bladed, pointy knife, probably anywhere between 6 to 12 inches long. Miss Hoffman's son was able to escape and alert the police, but by the time they came back, Miss Hoffman's jugular vein had been cut, both of them, with a huge transverse incision right across here. Feigenbaum fled into the alley. He threw the knife away. He was captured and convicted of murder. He was sentenced to death by electrocution at Sing Sing prison in New York. He was executed on April 27, 1896. He was the 19th man to actually be electrocuted. That was a relatively new form of execution at the time. A lot of people came to watch this one because they had botched the other 18, several of them badly, and they wanted to make sure this one got done pretty well. But it did it. He spent his last night in prayer with the resident priest, Father Creedon. He had made arrangements to be buried there in New York at the Poughkeepsie Catholic Church in their cemetery. And he goes through the usual ritual with the priests, taking him down for the execution. Electrodes were attached to him. They turn the electricity on. It all goes into him. He's pronounced dead. And interestingly enough, some of the doctors came back after he was pronounced dead and said, "We're not entirely sure that he's dead. Could we do it again?" So, about 15 minutes later, they do it again. And he really is dead. Now, his lawyer, after this, makes a statement to the press. He said, "I believe that Carl Feigenbaum, whom you have just seen put to death in the electric chair, can easily be connected with the Jack the Ripper murders in Whitechapel, London." He wouldn't say how he knew this. But there is such a thing as lawyer-client confidentiality. Could have had something to do with it. Feigenbaum's attorney said he looked up all of the dates of the Ripper murders and asked his client, had you been in London at that time? And his client said, "Yes, I had." He said he researched his whereabouts all over the world and was able to confirm several Ripper-like murders that had happened in those areas when Carl Feigenbaum was in that area at the time, particularly in South America. There were 8 women in Paraguay that we believe he killed. In addition, Wisconsin and in Pennsylvania. They just don't know. So, wind up with who really committed the Whitechapel murders? I have a theory. Because if it's on the internet, it's true. Any questions?
Earlier you mentioned that there were 3 factors that attributed to a serial killer potentially occurring in Whitechapel. What would those be?
In that particular one,
Mm-hmm.
well, there was one of the motivations that's been suggested is a hate for prostitutes. Now, this could have meant that the individual had a negative experience with prostitutes, or might have been related to a prostitute
Okay.
at one time. There is some evidence that Sickert's grandmother might have been a prostitute, but it's not definitive. So we have that. Also, in Sickert's case, in this particular one, you have the problem with his genitourinary system. This could have led a person to have a really bad attitude.
Fair enough.
And then there is the idea of wanting power over an individual. So that's what Cornwell believes his motivations were. Now, when you're talking about an overall motivation, you have to go to each individual person. There is one individual that they're looking at more closely these days, who is a man named John Kelly, who was incarcerated in an insane asylum after the Jack the Ripper murders, and he stayed there for about 10, 15 years, then he escaped. He came to the United States. They believe he committed some more murders in the United States. Then, when he was, I think, in his 60s, after 40 years on the lam, came back and turned himself in and died in the insane asylum at a ripe old age.
I see.
So,
Mr. Maddy.
All right, guys, I'm pretty sure Mr. Maddy would be more than happy to ask any more questions that you guys have. But I would like us all to thank Mr. Maddy for giving some of his time to us and giving a
Are there any good sources